Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Weekend Review for August 11, 2024. Let's make a quick note here as we get started. 328 days have passed since the war of September 2023, which culminated in the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. Even now, dozens of Armenians remain in Azerbaijani captivity, and their suffering continues to be met with widespread indifference by global governments, which unfortunately includes the regime in Yerevan as well. Let's keep that in mind, first and foremost, for all of us. Today, we're talking with Yeghia Tashjian. Great to have you with us, Yeghia.
Ողջույն Yeghia.
Thank you, Asbed. Thank you, Hovik.
Yeghia, so 2 weeks ago, on July 28th, Iran inaugurated Masoud Pezeshkian as its new president. Pashinyan attended the events in Tehran and met with Ayatollah Khamenei as well as Pezeshkian. The message to Pashinyan was that the change of presidents should not change Iran's policy towards the Caucasus, and they remain firmly opposed to any special corridors through Armenia. As much as this might sound comforting to Armenians that Iran is warning Azerbaijan and Turkey not to touch Armenia, is there also a warning for Pashinyan here? And what would that be?
Thank you, Asbed. I think the message of Iran is clear because let's not forget that Iran is a system. And when it comes to decision making, the system is not based on the president, whether which political color or party he belongs. So when it comes to the spiritual leader, he has the main veto power when it comes to decision making, and the position of Iran is very clear. They are in support of opening the communication channels in South Caucasus. However, they have the red line, which is the establishment of the so-called Zangezur corridor and threatening the Armenia-Iran border, which is strategic for both Armenia and Iran. So the Iranian message is, of course, both directed to Turkey and Azerbaijan, but also I can say to Russia and Armenia. If we remember when there was the Tehran summit a few years ago, and the Russian and the Turkish president also attended, the spiritual leader made clear to both Erdogan and Putin that the establishment of a Zangezur corridor threatens the Iran national security. And thereby, I think this message is also directed to Armenia that any compromise from Armenia, again, is a red line for Iran.
So do you think that Pashinyan is actually hearing this warning, that he should not be making deals with the West that compromises its border and adjacency with Iran?
I think yes, but there is also an issue that, there were discussions, at least I'm aware from some Western countries, to promote the idea of Kaliningrad in Syunik. But the Western peacekeeping forces or border guards, in this case European, maybe they would guarantee the transportation system or the networks between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I'm not sure what was Azerbaijan's position or clear answer to some European countries. The Armenian government, I can say in theory, is not against this solution because they don't want the Russians to guarantee the transportation system of these trade routes in Syunik. However, maybe they don't have a problem if the European forces or part of European mission would provide a certain guarantee. However, what Armenia was going to take in return, or the Azerbaijanis also were going to open the communication routes, as it was mentioned in the November 10th trilateral statement, or it was just a one-win solution that where Azerbaijan was going to take or to have a communication route with Nakhichevan and Armenia was going to have nothing in return. So this is also like part of the question that we don't have answers to it.
Yeah. You said that Iran had mentioned that its national security would be compromised with the Zangezur corridor. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is at stake for Iran in Armenia? And also, are these stakes similar to India's interests in the Caucasus?
We can divide this question into both from geopolitical and geo-economic interest. From geo-economic interest, let's not forget that Iran today has access to either Russia or Europe via Azerbaijan or Turkey. Via Azerbaijan, within the international north-south trade transport corridor, though there is a small section, the Astara-Rashod railway section, which is around 164 kilometers. It is being constructed, and I think it will be finalized in a few years. And also it has a route via Turkey. So the Iranians also want to have an alternative route so that one day, if the Turks and the Azerbaijanis pressure Iran and they block these routes for maybe various political reasons, the Iranians would have access to Europe or Russia via Armenia. That is via the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf corridor. However, here there are also some challenges because the southern section of this corridor, which connects Yerevan to Iran, is not constructed yet. It is being constructed, and the Iranians are also building a section of this route in Sunni. But also there is no railway connection. The only connection here we are talking is about roads. So basically, huge amount of cargo cannot pass via this route, especially in winter because of the mountainous, the narrow, and the risk, and the snow, and so forth. So the amount would be very minimum compared to the route towards Azerbaijan. And actually building railway connecting Iran to Armenia would cost around $3.5 billion, where neither Iran nor Armenia are ready to invest. So the only solution is open the communication channels between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Armenia would have railway connection to Iran via Nakhichevan, as it was during the Soviet times. So it is dependent on the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace negotiations. This is one point from the geo-economic. From the geopolitical perspective, because this would also increase Turkey's involvement and influence in the region. Turkey would have direct access to Central Asia via Armenia. And also, maybe on the long run, this would increase the pan-Turkic sentiments in the area, especially in northeastern Iran. So this is a concern from the Iran perspective. They both have a geo-economic and geopolitical perspective. From the Indian perspective also, to some extent, it is right, because when it comes to the international north-south corridor, Azerbaijan is the only linkage between Russia, Iran, and India. So the Indians are also in favor to have an alternative route toward Europe or Russia via Armenia. But as I said, Armenia's transportation or infrastructure is less developed compared to Azerbaijan.
If Turkey were to reach all the way to Central Asia through Armenia, would that not mean also that the West has full access to Central Asia? And as
Yes, of course.
a consequence, this would be a huge Russian national security issue.
Yes, this is why actually the Russians want to guard the routes in Sunni so that they can have a leverage also on the east-west corridor, or the so-called middle corridor connecting Europe to Central Asia. If, for example, communication channels will open between Azerbaijan and Armenia, I think the Russians would try to jeopardize that because it will not be in favor of their national interest unless they control these trade routes.
When you talk about the North-South economic corridor, that would include Georgia as well. How come Georgia is not in these conversations?
Well, compared to Armenia, Georgia's position is much advantageous because already they are part of the Trans-Caspian transport corridor or the middle corridor connecting Central Asia to Europe, that is part of the East-West corridor. They have attracted a lot of investments from China within the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. They have upgraded their ports. And most importantly, the Georgians are playing very well, balancing between the West, Turkey, China, and even Russia, unlike the Armenians. So it's not about pivoting. You always have to balance when it comes to foreign policy and diversify your trade routes, because this would also increase your leverage in the future. Now, the Georgians are also interested because they are not part of the international north-south corridor, at least directly, but they are also increased their interest in the Black Sea Persian Gulf corridor, and they have also railway access to Armenia. As I said, because from the Georgian perspective, it's also important for them to diversify the trade routes and not be at the mercy of Azerbaijan or Turkey in the future.
Yeghia, while we're talking about Iran, something came in this morning, I guess. Pezeshkian's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, resigned, and that was only days after his appointment. What does this mean for, its foreign policy in terms of relationship with the West and negotiations on the JCPOA and so forth? How should we process this news?
I just read few translated pages from Zarif's book he published recently, especially related to South Caucasus and so on. But Zarif's foreign policy, or the main objective of Zarif's foreign policy in the last years was to diversify Iran's foreign policy and not just be dependent on Russia or China, but also to open towards the West. He was the main architect of the success when it comes to nuclear negotiations. He's very pragmatic, he's flexible diplomat. It is being discussed in some Iranian social media or Telegram channels. Maybe they are not official channels, but the ideas are the following: that there was pressure from the spiritual leaders and the hardliners in Iran to retaliate. And maybe he was trying to find a third way or a compromise. And since maybe he failed and he realized that actually he will not succeed as advisor when it comes to foreign policy affairs to the current president, so he was like, it's much better to resign so that I don't be responsible for the coming crisis between the West and Iran.
Speaking of the coming crisis between the West and Iran, one more random question. What do you think of a potential Trump or Harris presidency and their policies, potential policies in the region towards Armenia, towards Iran, and wider Middle East?
I mean, if the Democrats win, definitely they will continue the current American foreign policy track when it comes to the Middle East, support Israel, but always with low profile, stating that, yes, we condemn the civilian attacks and so forth, but at the same time, we support Israel's self-defense against Hamas terrorism in their own words and so on. When it comes to South Caucasus, they will try to always play this soft power when it comes to Armenia, for example, increase military exercises, also maybe discuss energy security agreements. I mean, a lot of discussions about the new nuclear power plants. However, when Trump comes, I think he's more hardliner towards Iran. This is why the Iranians are not in favor of Trump coming to power. But when it comes to Ukraine, maybe Trump will try to find a common ground with Putin, and the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine definitely will have a positive impact on South Caucasus. What is now happening in Ukraine and also the attack on Kursk, the bordering area between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, Putin, he made it clear. He said that with this attack, I'm no more continuing the so-called ceasefire negotiations, or I'm not in favor of any negotiations with Ukraine. So it means that the war will be prolonged now.
Yeghia, Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh was also in Tehran to attend President Pezeshkian's inauguration, but he was assassinated by Israel's Mossad. At the same time, Israel claimed to have assassinated a senior Hezbollah commander near Beirut. Iran has vowed an unrestrained retaliation in the Middle East, and as a result, many countries, including Armenia, have warned that their citizens should either leave Lebanon immediately or not travel there until further notice, given the rising tensions and the potential of war between Israel and Lebanon.
And for our listeners, I think we should mention that Yeghia is based in Lebanon right now.
In Beirut, as a matter of fact, yeah. So, Yeghia, are we on the brink of a war in Gaza exploding into a larger regional mess? Is there appetite on the part of the regional powers like Iran, Israel, Turkey to expand this into a larger confrontation?
From the Israeli perspective, let's say that the double assassination almost in less than 24 hours for Iran and Hezbollah was a bit of, especially for Iran, it was very embarrassing because it happened in the middle of Tehran. A few hours after Ismail Haniyeh met the spiritual leader, the new president, and other officials. I think Israel's message was that I can reach to anyone, anywhere in Iran. This was a very strong message from the Israeli perspective. And also same in DIaspora, Hezbollah's stronghold in southern Beirut. It also means that Israel has infiltrated both maybe DIaspora and also Iranian security apparatus. And let's not forget that when we are in a war situation, always espionage, intelligence, counterintelligence is also part of this war. We rarely read about it, but it's also part of this war. It happens every minute and so forth. This is very interesting because I was thinking the following, that while you are assassinating someone who you are negotiating with, Ismail Haniyeh was indirectly also negotiating with the Israelis for ceasefire. So were the Israelis not in favor of ceasefire? Maybe they could have just stopped the negotiations. And also, Ismail Haniyeh, compared to Yeghia, the current Hamas leader, is much more pragmatic. He's based in Qatar. He has a lot of connections with the Russians, the Turks, the Qataris, the Iranians. So he's a flexible person. While the current leader, he's based in Gaza, he's much more militant person and have strong connections to Iran. So what Israel has accomplished from this assassination? Given the fact that Khalid Mash'al, who's also one of the Hamas member in the political bureau, He's not very close to Iran or Damascus, and he was supported by Qatar and Turkey. Maybe the Israelis were betting that Khalid Mash'al was going to replace Ismail Haniyeh. Maybe this was the objective, which they failed. Well, I can say that Israelis at the same time, they are doing their best to attract the American or to push for an American involvement in the region so that they can increase the pressure on the Palestinians, on Hezbollah and Iran, saying that, look, I have involved the US Navy is here. So if I'm attacked, the Americans will also bomb some positions. Maybe this was the objective or the logic behind it. From the Iranian perspective, definitely the retaliation will happen, also from the Hezbollah perspective. But judging from Nasrallah's last speech, he made it very clear that the retaliation will be very calculated and measured, and also from the Iran, because as we remember that in April, when Iranian officials were assassinated in Damascus, the Iranians retaliate after a few days, but it was very measured, it was very calculated. And I assume that the same would happen. Maybe this time the targets would be Israeli military bases in Israel, but with no major casualties. And also, let's not forget, at least on the social media, there were a lot of discussions about the American bases in northeastern Syria and Kurdish targets. Because now, from the Iranian perspective and the Turkish perspective and the Syrian perspective, and also the Russian perspective, the Kurdish political presence in northern eastern Syria has been viewed as an extension of American presence in the Middle East. So if we want to contain the American presence, then we have to contain the Kurdish influence in the region. So I assume that we may also see some attacks on North Kurdistan and also maybe on the American bases or Kurdish positions in Deir Zor and Hasaka. So this is not out of question. So these are some debates going on from the social media. The Turks definitely are not in favor of a major war in the region, and also the Russians are not in major war, because as we remember, Shoigu visited Tehran, and after that he immediately went to Baku.
I was going to ask you about those visits. Can you expand a little bit what was achieved in those visits?
I mean, what was discussed, at least in the media, and also my perspective. A few days ago in the British Telegram newspaper, it was mentioned that Iran was hinting that either Iraqi Kurdistan or Azerbaijan would be targeted. And today the Israelis, they called the Israeli soldiers from Georgia and Azerbaijan. This is very interesting because the Azerbaijanis were denying the Israeli presence in Azerbaijan, in their country. So basically, it means that either they are Israeli contractors or military advisors in Azerbaijan, and the Israelis called them. So it means that there was direct threat to them. Given the, as we said, or discussed, that international North-South corridor is very important for Russia due to geopolitical and geo-economic reasons. I think the Russians don't want to geopolitize that. And Azerbaijan is the only connection or the bridge between Iran and Russia. And the Russian cannot geopolitize that because it's the only oxygen for them. I mean, the Russian passive attitude towards Nagorno-Karabakh was to some extent justified with the increase of or the deepening of relations between Russia and Azerbaijan. So it is red line for Russia. I think the Russians made clear to Iran, or they tried to convince the Iranians to limit their retaliation and prevent any attack on bordering areas, let's say, in Azerbaijan, because this means that this would increase also Turkish presence in Azerbaijan, and Turkey maybe would respond, even if not directly attacking on Iran, but trying to target Iranian interest in the region. So the last thing, Russia wants to have a proxy war in South Caucasus or even Syria between Turkey and Iran. And of course, this would also impact negatively on Armenia.
Interesting. On the flip side of Iran's involvement in the Middle East, last week, Erdogan warned that Turkey could enter Israel, in his words, quote, just like we did in Artsakh, unquote. Additionally, Turkey joined South Africa's International Court of Justice case against Israel in defense of Palestinian rights. But despite all of this talk, the two countries, Turkey and Israel, still maintain diplomatic relations. Azerbaijani oil flows to Israel through Turkey. And just this week, a contract for Turkey to supply electricity to Israel was renewed. So is Turkey serious about escalating conflict in the Middle East, or are these Erdogan's standard populistic shenanigans?
I think this is part of Erdogan's populistic intentions in the Arab world to mobilize the Muslim and the Arab support in his favor. We remember when there was this debate with Shimon Peres in the World Economic Forum almost a decade ago, and later, and so forth. However, there is something interesting because we remember that the Azerbaijani official media also responded to Erdogan, and there was interesting article in the Nordic Monitor about some differences or small crack between Erdogan and Aliyev.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that also in the last meeting of the Turkish consul in Sochi, Erdogan didn't participate, and he pretexts that he went to Germany to watch the football between, I think it was between Netherlands and Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. Because both leaders, Aliyev and Erdogan, they wanted to become the leaders of the Turkic world. Erdogan has his new Ottoman aspirations. However, sometimes he's becoming very flexible. But Aliyev, because from his perspective, he won the war, so he's the main actor in South Caucasus. He has excellent relations with the Russians, with the Chinese, and he's balancing also the West. So he wants to become the victorious leader of the Turkic war. And this is not also in favor of Erdogan. So there is this personal friction between them. It's not a major friction that you can invest on it, but there is this small friction between these two leaders.
So finally, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, you live in Beirut. I wanted to ask how the current situation in Lebanon is, because we hear that it is very tense. Is it all in South Lebanon, or do you feel it in Beirut as well? And can you tell us how the Armenian community is navigating this?
Well, here in Beirut, I can say there is no direct impact of the war, but we are feeling the indirect impact, either economically, because always during summer, August is like this tourism season in Lebanon. Most of the hotels were not operating because less tourists came this year. And I think the economic impact we will experience it in the coming weeks or months. We also are experiencing the psychological warfare conducted by Israel and the ongoing Israeli jets flying and violating the Lebanese sovereignty. And always we are in this feeling that when, like Israel will bomb, or whether this solar boom sound was a bomb or not. So there is this psychological impact. But as I discussed before the interview, the South Lebanon is almost destroyed, especially the bordering villagers. Civilians are abandoning their villages and moving to other areas in the north or Beirut.
You mentioned that there are almost 100,000 IDPs because of that.
And also, according to some estimations, there is like 1 billion cost to rebuild South Lebanon. And this is something that the Lebanese government doesn't have the budget due to the financial crisis. So I'm not sure who will rebuild South Lebanon. And winter is upon us in the coming months. When it comes to the Armenian community, again, we are living in a psychological warfare or experience or the situation as other ordinary Lebanese. However, if direct clashes happen or a war, definitely this would also push again for a new wave of immigration of Lebanese to other countries. So there is this concern, because as we know that the community is getting smaller and smaller, especially after the Beirut port explosion, the financial crisis. So we are in a cycle of crisis in Lebanon, I can say. So from 2019 and until now, either the COVID, the Beirut port explosion, the financial crisis, and now we have this military or the war or semi-war situation.
Hey everyone, let's take a quick pause from our Groong podcast with Yeghia Tashjian today. I'm Asbed Bedrossian, and I'm here with my co-host Hovik Manucharyan, and we want to give you some reasons why you should not support us, or go to our page at podcast.groong.org/donate and support us.
So please don't donate to us if you're okay with missing out on comprehensive English language coverage of Armenia and Armenians.
Don't support us if you think independent, in-depth analysis of Armenian news isn't worth your time.
And definitely don't donate if you believe we don't need to keep bringing you expert interviews, cultural insights, political viewpoints, all without any external funding.
But if you value our work, don't hesitate to subscribe, comment, share, and if you're feeling generous, consider a donation to help us grow.
Yeah, so visit podcast.groong.org/donate to contribute, but only if you think we're worth it.
Thanks for being part of our community. We appreciate it because we are here for you. But don't let that pressure you into anything. Okay, back to our show now with Yeghia Tashjian.
All right. So coming back to Armenia and Azerbaijan, it was announced this past week that they will be removing the point about unblocking regional transport links from the so-called peace treaty. Essentially, I believe Aliyev's representative Elchin Amirbeyev said that by mutual agreement they have removed the provision, and that was one of the impediments to signing. So our question is simple: why?
Well, that's a $1 billion worth question. The Azerbaijani envoy was very specific that this was a temporary arrangement and they were going to discuss on a later time. So it doesn't mean that they gave up on the so-called Zangezur corridor. But maybe from the Azerbaijan perspective, also it was a diplomatic move to say to the West that, look, Azerbaijan is ready and is compromising. And now it is the time for Armenia to show some flexibility and compromise. And in this case, it is the amending the constitution. So there are different versions of this story about amending the constitution. There was, I think, Topchiev Center based in Baku. I don't remember the name. It's a think tank in Baku. So there was a paper about this arguing that if in the so-called peace treaty, let's say, or the peace treaty, there is no direct clause that, or if Armenia would say that it is impossible for us to amend the constitution this year, there would be a clause where Armenia is going to pledge that it has to omit the phrase connected to the Declaration of Independence, where it is mentioned the unification of Nagorno-Karabakh to Soviet Armenia, and also there is a phrase about the Armenian Genocide in Western Armenia. This is also, of course, in favor of Turkey. And also we know that the Constitutional Committee is working despite some of the members have reservations on Pashinyan. And I think it will be ready, the referendum, there was discussion in 2027. So still we have like 3 years.
Yeah.
Also organizing referendum, just hinting with the omission of the Declaration of Independence is not, the outcome will not be in favor of Pashinyan, or will not be in favor of the document if it will be signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So most probably it will be a package referendum where it also talks about maybe democratic reforms, about, I don't know, maybe foreign policy,
joining Europe,
diversification, something, maybe that will attract also the taste of the people, but also the current young generation.
Well, yeah, let's note that Armenia's parliamentary elections are scheduled for 2026, and there's no guarantee that this government will be re-elected because currently, at present time, it is deeply unpopular. So is the 2027 date strategically set so that they can get re-elected and then they will claim this as a mandate?
With this process, the current leadership will be re-elected. Yeah, a lot of people, they don't like this, but this is the reality. And also, let's not forget the so-called alliance of 4 parties. I forgot what is it, democratic something. It's about Babajanyan, Shirinyan, Aram Sarkisyan, and
there's the Liberal Democrats and a few other one-person parties.
The narrative that they are trying to coin, which is also in favor of Pashinyan, they have some percentage of success, I believe. And the opposition, still, I don't see a concrete, unified opposition that can challenge Pashinyan. The current opposition cannot. To be very
let me just, for our listeners, remind them that the narrative that these parties are forming is that Armenia's future is with the EU, and Armenian people are expressing their desire to join the EU. So that was the referendum that
and
they
also
wanted
the
to
closure
hold.
of the Russian military base and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean, the issue is that, okay, we close the Russian military base. Will the Europeans come or NATO come? If NATO or the Europeans says that we'll also provide, I don't know, border guard services or military base in Armenia, okay. But if there is no alternative, then what we are doing? But of course, like a lot of people, or if not a lot, but some people support them and so forth. I mean, I always say that liberal democracy is very cute. It can be very attractive, but it is a theory. And we need the flexibility. We need like pragmatic things, not just theories. Yes, I want also to have peace, and I want also like to have a peace between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey. But we should be very pragmatic. Theories are something, and on the ground, what is happening is something.
Yeah.
if the Europeans can pressure Azerbaijan and Turkey to compromise a bit and seek for peace, okay. But this is not happening, at least. At least what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh was clear.
And speaking in the context of the upcoming elections, I know that we talked that the constitution will not be ready by 2027. However, Daniel Ioannisian, who is Pashinyan's favorite, I guess, NGO actor, he mentioned that they will try to change the constitution, the existing constitution, parts of it that can be changed without a referendum. They will try to change it in such a way that the clause for stable majority will be removed. If you know the Armenian constitution, if whoever gets the majority, like 50%, they automatically get adjusted to 54%, so that they have a stable majority, and essentially one or two people cannot disrupt that majority. And some of the pundits were speculating that this is being done so that Pashinyan essentially will form a coalition with these parties in the new elections and will still sort of retain premiership or prime ministership, but not through civil contract, but through a wider coalition, because everyone realizes a civil contract by itself today will not be able to get the majority of votes. So that seems to be the way it's lining up. If I can just offer my own speculations a little bit, or at least what I'm listening to from the Armenian media. Do you see any major issues with
I
that?
don't know. I'm not a constitutional expert, and I'm not sure how the constitutional court will try to respond to this. So I cannot say if something like this can happen or no. But one thing is clear, at least within the constitution, it's mentioned that any amendment needs a referendum or popular referendum. But let's assume that a referendum happens with a package, and the outcome is not in favor of, let's say, Pashinyan's narrative, or also in favor of Azerbaijan. What would happen next? Azerbaijan would say that, look, Armenia is not in favor of peace. I did my best. I compromised, so-called compromise, and look, our Armenian people are in favor of war. This narrative can be propagated also in the media. We should be very careful. But at the same time, let's also assume that if the majority of the people in favor of the amendments, which is a package amendment, as we say, what will be the outcome? Or will there be definitely the next day peace treaty will be signed, or Baku will try to add a new condition? Maybe a condition would be like, I don't know, some Armenian political parties should take out phrases or articles of United Armenia or unification with Artsakh from their ideology or bylaws.
Or something about returning Azerbaijani nationals to Armenia, or something like that.
Imagine that, let's say, Pashinyan loses the elections and the opposition or any other political party comes, where part of its ideology is the return of the Armenians back to Nagorno-Karabakh. What would happen then? It's like a time bomb, I don't have the clear answer to it.
Right.
I mean, for me, the best solution would be a peace treaty, but at the same time, Azerbaijan accepts the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh to return back. Definitely, to be realistic, talking realistically, self-determination or independence or autonomy and so forth, it's very, for the time being, it's something impossible. This would be very painful, but this is the reality. So something that Armenia and Azerbaijan and the international community can act as a compromise, mutual compromise. But from the Azerbaijani perspective, any mutual compromise is red line, because they are the victorious side. Why should they compromise? And Armenia officially is not pushing for this scenario because they think that they don't have enough international support.
All of these things that we are discussing that we feel are up in the air and there's not enough clarity, I'm still stuck on the term from Amir Beyov that there was mutual agreements on the exclusion of the Zangezur corridor and stuff like that. But we don't know what these mutual agreements were, right? I mean, there's a lot of non-transparency on what these negotiations are entailing, what Pashinyan is agreeing that we are not reading.
The problem is that actually this reminds me of the decades of negotiations between the Armenian and the Azerbaijani side when it comes to the conflict resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh. The Armenian leadership was always non-transparent to the public. Secrecy is very important, of course. Doesn't mean that everything is happening or being discussed, the people should know, because sometimes we become very emotional and so forth. But like at least psychologically to prepare to the people what will happen, even in Azerbaijan, this is not being discussed. Usually anything compromise is red line for the Azerbaijani society. And the current leadership in Armenia is trying to sell this narrative that we have to compromise everything so that we can get something. But we are not sure what is this something. This is the problem. And also, let's not forget that if we are trying to take out the opening of the communications from the peace deal, so what does this mean? Does it mean that we'll have a peace agreement, but will there be a diplomatic mission in Baku and Yerevan? And what about the opening of the borders? I mean, if the main narrative or the argument is that to have trade interconnectivity, to open the trade routes, Azerbaijanis can make a trade via Armenia, Armenians can make the trade via Azerbaijan. If we are omitting this, so what's the value of the peace deal?
Yeah, it seems only to whitewash or to bolster Azerbaijan's image, basically. We are agreeing to a ticking time bomb that may explode anytime in the future, and basically another one-way concession.
And there are no international guarantees for let's say if the peace deal will happen, because this was a red line from the Azerbaijan perspective that they don't want any European, American, or even Russian guarantees. So what guarantee you have that, let's say, one side of the agreeing party will try to violate this agreement?
Right. So speaking about concessions, recently U.S. diplomats have been very clear in expressing the policy that the U.S. is pursuing in the Caucasus, and that is to break out Armenia out of its orbit around Russia. And it has been stated by multiple people, including most recently James O'Brien, as well as Toivo Klar, as a parting shot, from his very unsuccessful mission, I would say, stated that Armenia and Azerbaijan needed to find further political will and make tough compromises for the sake of an expected agreement. Again, what is explaining the sense of urgency on the part of the West to get this milestone before the Ukraine war simmers down, possibly?
This is not something new for me, actually. And this is the main strategy of the collective West, let's say, or some European countries and the US, to try to contain or minimize the Russian influence in South Caucasus. The Russians abandoning Nagorno-Karabakh was also in the interest of some Western leaders, because from their perspective, it means that Russia's position was going to weaken in South Caucasus, irrespective of the ethnic cleansing that happened in Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. We always say that big powers, whether China, Russia, US, and so on, they always have this imperial foreign policy. They don't care about few people, few thousand of people, big ethnically cleansed or leaving their homeland and so forth. They have their strategy. They put their strategy for years and they want to follow it. The same is happening in Gaza. Like almost 40,000 people are killed. It's going a genocide. Sorry, but who cares? The Americans, the Chinese, the Russians, each want to follow their strategy to contain or deter each other. And the same was happened during the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh. We think that everyone cares about us. This is also some Armenian, maybe, I don't know. We always feel that others owe us something. No, we have to be proactive. We have to show our value. Otherwise, no one will see our value in this case. Otherwise, we'll become endless proxy war, as it was the case in our history between the Byzantines, the Persians, between the Romans, the Persians, the Ottomans, the Russians. At least for once, we try to take the initiative. We try to initiate a proposal or a strategy or policy, and not just follow the Russian, the Western, or whatever other countries' proposals and ideas that they are putting on our desk. For example, I was always thinking, like talking out loud. Was there an Armenian version of opening the communication channels or trying to address the issue of the Zangezur corridor? An Armenian version about it. Yes, for example, Pashinyan tried to come up with this crossroad for peace thing, but still it was very vague. We are against the so-called Zangezur corridor, but what was our response? Not opening it, okay, was there an Armenian version that maybe we can try to provide or offer this to other countries, to China, to Russia, to the West, to the EU? No, like even in Nagorno-Karabakh, we never proposed something. We always were following what others were proposing us there and discussing it.
Well, frankly, I didn't see the difference very much between the Crossroads of Peace and the whole Zangezur corridor proposal. Okay. Yeghia, also 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting between Serdar Kilic and Ruben Rubinian, the two representatives discussing Turkish-Armenian so-called normalization of relations. Turkey reiterated that no steps could be expected until Aliyev's green lighting of the process. But we've known this all along. So what was the point or the value of holding this meeting at this time?
Just for the sake of meeting, and also to say that, look, we are meeting. I mean, Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister, he said clearly that everything is dependent on the peace treaty or the negotiations or the outcome of the negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And maybe also the temporary compromise of Azerbaijan on the so-called Zangezur corridor was to some extent linked. And maybe the Turks, they pressured Azerbaijan to give up something because already they have an alternative route, which is the Georgia, connecting Azerbaijan to Turkey. And what is happening in the Middle East and the Iranian response maybe made or attracted some concern from Turkey. So everything or the so-called normalization process between Armenia and Turkey is directly linked with Azerbaijan because it is not in the interest of Turkey to try to push Azerbaijan to the corner or try to agree with Armenia behind the back of Aliyev.
You say that Turkey is a main beneficiary of opening the border. Is the West also a key beneficiary of a more so-called normalized relations between Armenia and Turkey?
Yes, of course, because also from the perspective of some Western leaders, that this would lead to the closing down of the Russian military base in the future, let's say, between Armenia and which is based in Gubri, bordering Armenia and Turkey. And also it would increase the Turkish influence in South Caucasus, which is a counter to Russian and even Chinese influence or the growing influence in the region.
Okay, well, so if there's some form of normalization that comes along, what's to be expected on issues such as the Armenian Genocide and also in relations between Armenia and its diaspora? Because over the past year or so, Turkey has done everything possible to help Pashinyan destroy those bonds between us. And this is at a time when Turkey itself is investing $500 million around the globe, buffing up its own diaspora.
Well, if we will try to compare to the Greek-Turkey relations, when some countries recognize the Greek genocide, of course, Greece welcomes. Maybe something we expect a scenario like this, that Yerevan will have a low profile or will play a very low profile when it comes to recognition of the Armenian genocide. The best scenario, if something like this happens, is to engage in a division of labor, where an agreement between the Armenia's foreign ministry, embassies, and also the diaspora lobbying group, that the main lobbying activities of the diaspora will continue. Armenian government will support these lobbying activities. But because of the current situation, maybe Armenia should play a low profile. This is like, I'm just imagining if normalization happens between Ankara and Yerevan. At the same time, it should be a red line for us that Ankara tries to pressure Yerevan on the genocide recognition or events to be organized in Yerevan related to genocide and so forth. I assume, of course, the Turkish lobbying will also continue and there will be pressure from Ankara on this sphere, but it also is dependent to the sphere of cooperation between Yerevan and the diaspora. And unfortunately, this sphere is to the minimum now. Instead, Yerevan is trying to coordinate with individuals and not with institutionalized organizations in the diaspora. I mean, irrespective of, I always say, irrespective of the political regime that comes to Armenia, there should be a coordination between the Armenian Foreign Ministry and the Armenian lobbying groups in the diaspora.
All right. Well, let's wrap up our topics here. Thank you, Yeghia, for all that information.
Thank you.
I would like to ask each of you if there's something on your mind from the past week or 2 weeks. Yeghia, in your case, it's been a while since we talked to you. Something that you would like to share with our audience. Hovik, what's on your mind?
I just want to reiterate that we should do everything possible to keep the public attention on Armenian prisoners in Baku ahead of this COP29 conference. So on Twitter, it is hashtag COP29. Just try to follow it, comment. Yeah, so just follow that hashtag, comment, retweet, share, and let's hope to keep this topic in the forefront of public attention as people think about COP29.
Yeah, something on your mind that you would like to share?
I was thinking about two things actually, but because Hovik brought about the issue of the COP29, I was discussing with a friend yesterday or the day before, and he asked me, what if Armenia's foreign minister visits Baku, participates in this COP, in return of the release of the Armenian prisoners of war? What would be our response? I was like, of course I would support. Yes, it's something like, I don't know, a bit strong to swallow it. But at the same time, the life of our prisoners of wars are being endangered. And for me, their release and return back safely to Armenia is a priority now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you including in the ranks of those prisoners of war the leadership of Artsakh?
of course, everyone.
Do you think Pashinyan wants them back in Yerevan?
Well, maybe this is a hopeful or optimistic scenario. I don't know. Another thing that I was also thinking about, because it was the anniversary of the Beirut port explosion. And sometimes I was saying that how cheap was our life? No justice. And fighting for justice or seeing a justice in Lebanon is something maybe mission impossible, People died. I could have been one of them. I know a lot of people close, some injured, died, and so forth. And the political elite doesn't care about it, which is very interesting. Like I always hold them responsible, saying that our officials assassinated their own citizens.
Yeah, that was August 4, 2020, I think, right?
Yeah.
Were the commemorations very muted in Beirut this year?
No, there was a commemoration and the protest movement. They do it every year. And still, the relatives of the ones who were martyred, I can say, they were also present there.
All right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you, Yeghia, for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Yeghia.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was our show recorded on August 12, 2024. We've been talking with Yeghia Tashjian, who is a regional analyst and researcher based in Beirut with expertise in China's geopolitical and energy security interests in Iran and the Persian Gulf. Currently, he is an instructor in international affairs at the American University of Science and Technology and senior research assistant at the Essam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. Don't forget to support us. Please go to podcasts.groong.org/donate and become a sustaining member of Groong. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.